Husband's been secretly working on a new identity to start over with his mistress in another state, and the way I learned it wasn't from some dramatic confession or a lipstick stain on a collar. It was from a rubber band that snapped on a manila envelope and sent a little blizzard of papers, passport photos, and one of those stiff plastic sleeves from a UPS store skittering across our hallway like cockroaches fleeing the light, and there I was, barefoot in yesterday's socks, holding a stack of forms I file for other people every day and trying to make my breathing match the rhythm of the wall clock because a part of me had trained for this without knowing. I should tell you who I am before I let the hallway keep talking. I'm Nora, I'm 31, and I'm a records clerk at the county clerk's office, the window where people line up with puzzled faces and a fistful of life in their hands and ask me what line they need for a deed of trust, a DBA, a domestic partnership, a name change. I live in paperwork the way scuba divers live in water. I can smell the difference between a form filled in a hurry and one rehearsed in a parked car. I know the posture of people becoming someone else. And somehow I didn't recognize it happening in my own house until an envelope lost its temper. Let me start with the envelope because it's as good a narrator as any. It was labeled EOBs in my husband's blocky engineer handwriting, explanation of benefits, the boring little medical statements we all get and never read. It was heavier than it should have been when I slid it off the bookshelf to clear space for the little jade plant I'd picked up at the farmer's market. The band snapped, the flap popped, and out slipped the life of a stranger who lives in my husband's face. 2 passport photos of him where he'd shaved his beard down to nothing and looked like a cousin I don't send Christmas cards to. A USPS change of address confirmation addressed to a name I'd never heard, Kellen North, with our street as the old address and a P.O. box in Flagstaff, Arizona as the new. An application draft for a state ID from New Mexico, filled out in pen, careful letters. The kind of A he learned in 3rd grade and never unlearned. A receipt for a private mailbox at a UPS store 2 suburbs over, and a thick business card from a mobile notary and signing agent who had circled a date and written, "We can do the affidavit of name change when you're ready." There was also a receipt from a bus company with 2 tickets purchased in cash, departing next month, one-way, no-seat assignments, and a sticky note folded like a prayer flag with 2 words in his hand I've read in hundreds of notes on our fridge, "For us." Underlined. Twice. I sat down on the hallway rug because my legs decided wood was too honest for this. The photos stared up at me with their government silence. "Kellen North," I said out loud, because sometimes the thing you need to survive is the sound of your own voice making air solid. My husband's name is Daniel. He is 33. He writes firmware for machines that make other machines. He says things like, "I'll push a patch before lunch" through a headset while stirring risotto with his free hand. And I used to find it endearing that he could inhabit 2 languages at once, code and kitchen, and now I was watching him switch tongues entirely. You'd think the next part would be me rifling through the house like a raccoon in an open garage. But I'm not a rifler. I'm a filer. I gathered what had fallen, I placed it neatly on the coffee table, I made a cup of tea, and I did the only thing I trust with my mind when the floor wants to disappear. I started a log. Just like at work. Date, time, item, notes. April 3rd, 7:12 p.m. Found envelope labeled EOBs containing name change artifacts for Kellen North, Flagstaff P.O. box, notary card, bus tickets for 5/18, 2 seats, ID application draft, New Mexico. I wrote without adjectives because adjectives are accelerants. The mistress, you're wondering. Where does she enter? She enters in the margins like they always do. In the past months there had been a constellation I refused to draw lines between: Daniel's sudden devotion to early morning coffee walks, a second phone he called his testing device because he didn't want to dirty up his personal one with beta apps, a new backpack with a hidden zipper I only noticed because I bumped it while vacuuming, a habit of leaving his ring on the bathroom shelf to dry his hands. There was also the postcard that arrived with no return address and a picture of a red desert cliff I later learned was Cathedral Rock in Sedona. The message on the back in a tidy looping hand, "Can't wait to see this sky with you when it belongs to us." I had held that card against the light and told myself it was a colleague teasing him about a conference. I lied to myself with the soft voice I use on strangers who cry behind my plexiglass window when their papers aren't in order. I am very good at kindness. I am less good at asking for receipts in my own kitchen. He came home late that night because Tuesdays had become late nights, and he walked in with a burrito bowl and a grin and the smell of a person who has been in someone's car with the windows down. I had put the envelope back where it was because I needed to see if he would reach for it. He didn't. He kissed me like a reflex and started talking about a tool chain I don't pretend to understand. I watched his hands. He has the kind of hands that look good holding ropes and leaves in me, and I wanted to cut them off and mail them to Flagstaff with a note that said, "Here, take the instruments too." Instead, I said, "How was your walk?" And he said, "Windy," and I said, "Any mail?" And he said, "Just junk." We watched a show we've always liked, and it felt like someone else wearing our faces enjoyed it on a couch like ours in a state we haven't visited together. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake in the dark listening to his breathing even out while a second heartbeat that belonged to no one labored in the room. Around 3 I got up and stood at the window and watched the empty street and the way the streetlight made our neighbor's garbage bin look like a waiting person. I don't know how long I stood there, but I remembered, with an ache so old it felt like a fossil, the first time Daniel told me he wanted to marry me in a laundromat where one dryer had a sign that said "out of order" like a small libretto. He held up a warm towel like a priest holds up a wafer and said, "I want to do this with you even when we're 80, and I laughed and said, "Fold laundry," and he said, "Decide what matters," and I said yes in a way that rearranged my whole ribcage. That was 4 years ago. We were broke and sincerely hopeful. He had the right name then, and so did I. I remember thinking, we will be the kind of people who don't lie. And then I remember all the small ways we did, like how we told ourselves that late nights were the price of ambition and that drift was just a season and that using different pillows meant nothing evolutionary. The next morning I left for work early, not because paper was kinder than people, though it often is, but because I needed the particular comfort of a binder clip snapping shut. I spent my morning stamping, filing, and watching the parade of reinvention. A woman changing her name back after a divorce who told me quietly it felt like unlocking a room that had always been hers. A man filing a DBA so his food truck could be Salty Dog Tacos instead of John's Truck, excitement fraying the edges of his voice. A teen with a parent applying for a birth certificate amendment because someone had finally listened to the name he'd carried in his mouth since he was small. I loved them for their honesty. I loved the way they stepped up to the glass with their whole faces. At lunch, I didn't eat. I walked to the UPS store whose address was on the receipt and bought a roll of tape I didn't need and watched the man behind the counter the way you watch a key witness in a courtroom drama you tell yourself you don't like. He was cheerful in the particular way of people who sell boxes for a living. I asked about mailbox rentals like a person thinking of starting a small business. He asked if I wanted to be added to an existing account, like a spouse. Maybe, I said. What if the account is under a business name? He shrugged. We look it up by box number or by name. Kellen North. I said before I could stop myself, but softly, like you say a curse near a baby. He typed, frowned politely. Can't disclose that. Of course, I said, and I smiled like a woman whose heart wasn't swallowing its own tongue. After work, I drove to a library branch I never go to and sat in a back corner where the outlets work and the lamps make puddles of permission, and I started looking. Not internet looking where your brain gets lost in content, Clark looking, which is just reading with a gear engaged. I searched public records for Kellen North. I found 3 in other states who were not him: a 6 to 7-year-old with a property lien, a college kid with a parking ticket, a baby with a birth certificate. I searched our state's name change dockets for Daniel. Nothing filed. I searched our county for UPS store mailbox contracts. Not public. I searched for the notary. Legitimate, insured, mobile, same scribbled date on her online booking calendar that matched the card in our envelope, as if the world wanted to be consistent while our marriage did not. Then I turned my search to hotels in Flagstaff. Hotel Suncrest. The Lowell. The Painted Lady. The Cloud Crest. Mirador. One after another, I flipped through website galleries of rooms with quilts and little bottles of lotion on trays and thought about strangers arriving in cars that smelled like oranges and choices. I didn't book a room. I put my hands flat on the table and breathed the antiseptic library smell and told myself, we will do this like a filing. We will line the papers up straight. You want her name. I did too. It came on a Friday in a supermarket aisle under the hum of the freezer when a postcard slid out of Daniel's wallet as he reached for his debit card to pay for frozen mango. I wasn't snooping, I was buying yogurt. But sometimes the universe chooses the most fluorescent-lit places for an epiphany. The postcard was from Albuquerque, a picture of a hot air balloon against a blue so violent I wanted to complain to the manager. The handwriting was the same as the Sedona card, the tidy loops that somehow felt like a smile that knew it was being watched. "Can't wait to lift off," it said. A. I froze so hard I could feel the automatic doors breathing. A stands for ally or Avery or anything that includes a person who writes lift off and means leave. Daniel didn't notice. He tucked the card back into his wallet with a barcode coupon and we went home and made tacos like our kitchen walls hadn't just started learning a new alphabet. I will spare you the next 2 weeks of gathering because it reads like a boring heist if I tell it in detail and like madness if I tell it in feeling. I took photographs like an archivist. I scanned what could be scanned. I printed what would later refuse to load. I placed everything in a folder labeled with grim humor, Exhibit A. He left a checklist in his email, which I saw because the 2FA code pinged my tablet one afternoon like a treacherous little bird. It was titled North Plan. Lines through items like storage unit, second checking, P.O. box, rent car with AZID after. A column labeled her with a heart drawn like a teenager's. Alana in parentheses. Her name sat on the screen like a ring on a sink, leaving a mark even after you take it away. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my tablet. I did the thing that makes me feel human when a system tries to turn me into a statistic. I called my sister. "He has a plan," I said, and she said, "We have a bigger one." And in 20 minutes she was in my kitchen with 2 pints of ice cream, a legal pad, and the kind of composure only an older sibling who once watched me glue my kindergarten art to the dog possesses. We made a counterplan. Not to chase or to beg. To protect. Freeze my credit. Move half our joint checking to a new account with my name alone. Photograph the household items I would not negotiate on: my grandmother's desk, the ugly chair we salvaged from the curb and made our own. Call a lawyer. Ask a stranger to sit with me while we three-way called the bank and said very calmly, "No withdrawals over $500 without both signatures." It felt petty and adult at once. Protection, like filing, isn't dramatic. It's thousands of tiny, boring decisions that make a wall. I confronted him on a Sunday morning because Sunday mornings had been our quiet catechism. Coffee from the same chipped mugs, the news, the crossword, his knee against mine under the table like a punctuation mark. I put the folder on the table between our mugs. I didn't stand. I didn't cry. "Who is Kellen North?" I asked, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to ask the question like a clerk who has a stack of forms to get through and no time for poetry. His face changed the way faces do when the story they carry meets the light. He didn't pretend it was a joke. He didn't pretend not to know. He stared for a long breath, put his hands on the table, palms down, and said, "The person I was going to be in 2 months. The was caught me. Was." He made a small, broken sound that wanted to be a laugh and wasn't. "I didn't plan for you to find out this way," he said, which is what cowards say right before the floor goes lava. And then the part of me that files birth certificates watched the part of him that had practiced being Kellen step forward and try to speak English. "I was going to leave," he said. "With Alana. Start over in Arizona. New jobs. New names. New everything." He looked at the coffee like coffee could tell him how to be a better animal. "Why?" I said, "because motives are the birth record of behavior." He started to say something sharp like a defense and then he exhaled it away. "Because I felt like a ghost here," he said. "Because every day felt like a rerun and I wanted a pilot episode. Because I kept waiting to become the person I thought I was promised, and then I realized promise isn't a person, it's a verb, and I wasn't doing it." He looked at me. "Because I was selfish." "Why the new name?" I asked. "Because I wanted a door I could close behind me that didn't have your fingerprints on it," he said, and I tasted metal and restraint. "Did you change it legally?" "No," he said. "I made a plan. I made steps." He shuffled the papers like a boy shuffling his own report card. The bus tickets. The notary. The mailbox. The second checking account with a balance big enough to embarrass me that I hadn't noticed it draining from our joint. I let my face stay still because women who file need to be stoned until the form is accepted. How long? I asked. A year, he said. Maybe more. It started with a trip for work. I met her at a coffee shop that serves iced lavender things that taste like mistakes. She asked what I was reading and I told her the truth and I felt new. The rest is you, I said, because cowardice is handmade. If you want the part where I threw the coffee at him, it doesn't exist. There is only the part where I picked up a pen and wrote the date on the manila folder and then wrote in small neat letters, "Motion to separate." There is only the part where I said, "You will be out by Wednesday," and the part where he said, like a student who knows the answer because it is written behind my eyes, "Okay." There is the part where I told him I had frozen our credit and called our bank and the look on his face that I will never scrub off my memory where a boy realizes his mother knows about his slingshot. There is the part where he asked, soft as a bruise, "Can I tell you something without you throwing it back at me?" And I said, "Because I am not a monster," 2 sentences, and he said, "I was going to be Kellen because I once wanted to be Daniel and I don't know how to do wanting without leaving a room," and I said, "You just did it right now and no one died." He cried then. Quietly, poorly, like a man who's out of practice. I didn't hand him a tissue. I handed him a box. I will tell you about the mistress because you'll ask, and because the story doesn't end in my kitchen. She wrote to me 2 weeks later. Not on postcard. In an email to an address she should not have known unless he gave it to her. "Nora," it said. "I don't expect you to respond and I don't deserve your time. I want you to know I knew about you from the beginning and I told myself a story about saving him and I can see now I was stealing. He has ended it. I will not contact him again. If you need anything from me for legal purposes, I will tell the truth." I stared at the screen for a long time and felt the kind of anger that is so clean it's almost cold, and then felt something else under it like the way a wave recedes and leaves glass behind. I did not write back. I forwarded the email to my lawyer. I made tea. I told my sister we would go to the movies because laughter preserves the species. There was a storage unit, of course. There always is in these stories. Beige roll-up door. Box after box of things you put aside when you make a second life out of a first one. The manager let me see the contract because my name was still attached to our shared card and because sometimes people hand you the lock combination to their next act by forgetting you know how to read. Inside, camping gear, a duffel of clothes that smelled like someone else's laundry soap, 2 mugs wrapped in sweaters like they were already in love with a cupboard somewhere else, a binder labeled AZ with printed job listings for Kellen and apartments with move-in special circled, and a Polaroid of 2 people at the edge of a canyon with their backs to the camera, their shadows touching. I took pictures. I took nothing else. I closed the door. I changed the lock code. I sent him a screenshot and wrote, "Pick up on Friday at 3 p.m. I will not be there. The code will change again at 4. It's very boring to tell you about the next month and very important. How people showed up like post-its on a case file, bright and adhesive. My neighbor who took my spare key and watered the jade plant. My coworker who slid a stack of color-coded sticky flags onto my desk and said nothing. The barista who started remembering my name again because it had stopped being lost in someone else's mouth. My mother who cleaned the top of my fridge like it was a ritual and left a casserole with a note that said, "Heat at 180 degrees until hope." There were also practicalities that will keep you alive more than rage will, making a list of online accounts and 2-factor changing them like locks, asking the bank to set up text alerts that would ding me if a transaction over a certain amount tried to drag me out to sea, taking a day off work specifically for crying and letting my body do it like it was a job. I started a support group I did not want to need, sitting in a circle with strangers who said things like he loved me when I made my voice small and I adopted a dog and named her after. I brought donuts and made everyone fill out their own intake sheets because if I don't get to be the clock at home, I will be the clock where my heart has a badge. Daniel sent me 1 letter on actual paper, which I respect because paper has the decency to take up space. He wrote that he'd closed the P.O. box, that he'd told his employer he needed time off and then told them the truth without adjectives, that he was moving to a studio across town where there is no room to run and where he hoped the walls would teach him how to be. He wrote a line I file under wish someone else had made it up. I thought reinvention would save me, but it turns out the only honest name change is the one you speak in a room where your first name hears it and nods. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not offer it to himself. He placed the stamp crookedly. I put the letter in a plastic sleeve and labeled it DN Lost because I do not trust memory, only filing. People will want a moral, so here's a folded one I carry in my wallet now. You can love someone so much you want to tuck them into your own birth certificate, and they can still decide that the sound of a bus leaving at midnight is their favorite song. Both things can be true without you being unlovable. People will ask about reconciliation. Here is my messy human answer. I didn't torch the house and I didn't open the door. I built a porch and sat there. He came by twice with paperwork and once with apology and once with an invitation to talk like people who don't own each other. We tried a session with a counselor who wears linen and asks too many questions about what our bodies do when we tell the truth. Mine said jaw, his said stomach. He is not Kellen. He is not a husband I can recognize when the lights are off. He is a man who did not change his name legally and still almost erased me with a pen. We are not together now. We are not enemies. We are citizens of a small shared history with a border we both respect. Last week, I stood at my window at 3 a.m. because habits are animals you have to coax out the door every night, and I watched the streetlight paint the garbage bin and I said out loud, I am not an address you forward your life away from, and something in my ribcage sat down and finally put down its suitcase. I started taking a ceramics class because it felt like a dare to make a thing that holds water. My first bowl is lopsided in a way that would make a museum registrar write condition, charming, and I love it like it has a passport with only my stamp. I signed up for a hike with the local outdoors club, and somewhere on a ridge where the wind wrote nonsense through my hoodie I thought of Alana looking up at the same sky from somewhere else, and I did not wish her anything unkind. I wished her the truth because the truth is the only identity that survives moving day. I sold the manila envelope at a yard sale by accident because it turned into nothing more than paper when I stopped feeding it secrets. I bought a frame and put inside it the first sticky note I made the night the rubber band snapped. April 3rd, 7:12 p.m. found. It sits by my door. It reminds me that the best documents are the ones you write to yourself in your own clear hand, in a house that knows your actual name and says it back without practicing.